Gentle disclaimer to all of our listeners. All medical information mentioned in this podcast is purely informational. It is not individualized medical advice. Please follow up with your physician or medical practitioner for individualized care specific to your needs.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Know and Do Better podcast. My name is Dr. Melanie Carminati, and I will be your host. So today we are in for a treat. We have Nicqueva Haughton here joining us. Nicqueva, thank you so much for joining me today.
So happy to be here with you, Mel.
For those who attended our endometriosis fundraiser in March, you already know Nicqueva. She was featured on our panel discussion and was serving as a patient advocate there and shared her experience on stage during the live event. And everything that she shared was really impactful, powerful, and also hopeful. I knew that I wanted to have her join me on this podcast because she has many words of wisdom and encouragement to give individuals who have endometriosis and are either at the beginning of the journey of getting help or have been going through it for some time. So for those, just as a reminder, she has many accolades, but for those who don't know Nicqueva, she is a director of Teen Ministries Revival Church in Hamden, Connecticut. She's also the founder and CEO of Elsada Shoes, LLC. She's the author of the Marriage Cookbook, many other accolades. And should I mention this one last one that I love that she put it this way, she is an endometriosis champion. So Nicqueva, thank you again. And let's just start the conversation off with having you take me through when you first started having symptoms of endometriosis.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Mel. I really feel that warm welcome. It's so nice to kind of get your flowers. You know, we don't hear good things about ourselves often enough. So thank you for creating this platform and, just giving endometriosis patients a voice. Endometriosis started for me in my very early, as soon as my period started, really. I got my period, I think I was 12 years old. And shortly after, into my teenage years, I began to have excruciating cramps. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse to the point where I was missing school. I was unable to talk sometimes, crawling on the floor in pain, vomiting, things that just didn't seem to me that they should go along with menstrual cramps.
Sure.
But I was also kind of young too, so I wasn't really seeing an OBGYN at the age of 15, 16. I actually didn't start seeing an OB until I was 18 years old. And my mom was finally like, you're growing up. You got to go to this kind of doctor. And I was like, okay. And I started seeing an OB when I was 18. We talked about the cramps. They wanted to do an ultrasound. And they did an ultrasound. And he called me to his office. And he's like, come back, for another appointment. I want to have a meeting. And he told me he saw all these grapefruit and golf ball size masses and cysts and whatever words he used. It was so long ago, but he wanted to do surgery. And he said, well, we'll go in, we'll take everything out. And I said, okay. So then I had turned 19 at that time. This was 2004. He did the surgery. He had to take out my left ovary. And he told me that it's endometriosis. He said, you have endometriosis. We don't know anything about it. All I can tell you is that you probably will never bear children. We couldn't save your ovary. He said, I took out as much as I can. But again, we don't know much about it. There I was, 19 years old. And it was just, it kind of happened fast, just poof, here's life.
Yeah. And so at that time, this doctor wasn't technically a endometriosis specialist, right?
He was not a specialist. He was my first OB. And to my knowledge, I don't think there were hardly any specialists. Yeah, I guess he was just doing the best he could.
And so then what happened after that? What happened after that procedure? How did your life change? Did you still have symptoms?
So after that, he put me on a depot shot for 6 months. And his words were, it will make you feel a little menopausal, but we're just putting the uterus to sleep. He said, I just want to make sure that, we kind of got rid of everything and this should help. After the depot shot, I completed 6 months of it. I had gained 30 pounds, got off the depot shot. Mind you, I'm 19 years old. I go from 120 pounds to 150 pounds. And then I'm immediately diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. which is a huge part of my story, but I won't go too deep into that today. But I have my beliefs about all the connection of these sicknesses and these medicines that we're using. But yeah, I felt okay actually after the surgery. I still had heavy periods, but I didn't have the excruciating pain. And that lasted for, I want to say, a good 3 or 4 years. The bleeding was uncontrollable, but the pain was a little more manageable.
Okay.
But then it came back with a vengeance. It came back with a vengeance. So I think that's when I learned that there's really no cure for endometriosis, because it just kept coming back. And I gotten all the procedures that you could name, ablations and, all the clean outs and, little procedures that you can get to kind of help with the pain and help with the endometriosis. And nothing seemed to be working. It all gave temporary relief. I did have temporary relief, but it all just kept coming back and coming back. I would do ultrasounds every 6 months just to monitor some cysts, and nothing seemed to be growing as far as the cysts were concerned, but I guess they can see the thickening on ultrasound. I don't know if you want me to get into this yet, but finally, after just years and years of pain, in 2019, I decided to get a hysterectomy, and I had to beg for it. I mean, when I say I had to beg, because I guess they consider you young, and you're like, oh, you're young, but I'm like, I have 3 kids that you guys said I wouldn't have.
Yeah, so let's go to that. Let's go to
Yeah.
that first, because you, unlike what the doctor told you when you were 19, you were able to carry 3 children.
I have had miscarriages, but when I got pregnant with my daughter, my oldest, I didn't really think it was going to last. I was just like, and I was really young. I was only 21 when I got pregnant with her. It just kept going, right? You just a trimester after trimester. Here she was. And, I considered her like a little miracle child. I thought I would never have kids, and here she was. But then a little over a year later, I was pregnant again.
Amazing.
And I was like, wait a minute. And then by the time so I had my son, they're just 2 years apart. They're both born in July, exactly 2 years apart. But by the time my son was 4 months old, I was pregnant again. Wow. Then I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even have time to process anything. So by the time I was 25, I had 3 kids.
Yeah.
That they said I wouldn't even have. So then I was like, all right, I've done my share to the human race. Like, time out, hold on. I think it's unique. I think it is amazing. They all came from the same ovary, it's kind of cool. Yes. But yeah, I what I didn't think was possible and what I wasn't even ready to process yet, because I'm 19. I wasn't thinking about having kids when they took my ovary out. I wasn't able to process that, but there it was. And I was very grateful. And I know everybody doesn't have that story. Yeah. Everybody's not as fortunate. God saw fit for me to have that story. And I hope that it is encouraging to others, because there are ways, even if you don't get natural birth, there are ways to be a mom. I think everybody deserves that chance if that's their desire.
Absolutely. Our last podcast episode, I featured a fertility specialist, Dr. Edward Najat, and we spoke about all of the different treatments and possibilities for patients or individuals who are having difficulty with conceiving. And there's so many options nowadays, and there's so many treatments to really make it possible. If getting pregnant naturally isn't successful.
And I have a friend too. She has been trying to have a baby for at least like 6 or 7 years. And this year she finally had a child. So I know for some people it's a long road. You feel like giving up. But she finally was able to do that. And I was so happy for her. So
beautiful.
Yeah, don't give up.
So now take us back to the point when you decided to have the hysterectomy.
Couldn't keep a job. I was just constantly, even when I was working, I was constantly in the bathroom. I just was not feeling good. I was in so much pain. I wasn't going anywhere, doing anything. I did not have a life. I couldn't go anywhere for, an extended amount of time because I was scared of like bleeding through my clothes. It was too much. And I actually was working for a school, and I loved the school so much. I worked with special education students, and all kinds of needs. I just couldn't be there for them like I wanted to. And then when I was in pain, I never lost patience with them, but I felt that my patience level wasn't where it could be. And I called a doctor. Actually, I was at the school at work, and I called and I said, I want to have a hysterectomy. And he actually took my phone call. And he was like, all right, call the surgical nurse, we'll schedule it or whatever. But this was after years of begging and years of, just being told, oh, you can manage the pain. It'll be fine. You're young. You're too young. Don't do it yet. And so he then agreed to do it. And he left in that ovary that's there. But when he did the surgery, he couldn't do it by himself. After I was asleep, he had to call in the general surgeon because he discovered that the endometriosis had spread to my bowels and around my bladder. And so when he woke me up, I just, I remember him saying, hi, everything went well. He told me he had to call the general surgeon. And he says, I see why you were in so much pain. I see now. But I guess this couldn't be seen from other imaging and testing.
Right.
But to think that in 2004, a doctor had took out everything he could. He opened me. They're looking at everything, taking out all they can. The second time they did it laparoscopically.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, with the small incisions. But so I've had both types of surgery. To think that all that stuff had came back and grew back and with a vengeance and even spread further than what originally was, just maybe 15 years later. So it was a tough decision because I couldn't figure out who am I without a uterus, right? I know everybody has their pronouns of choice. My pronouns are her, she, and I enjoy that. I enjoy being a woman, but I was trying to, and I don't know why my mind went here, what makes me a woman? The fact that I have a uterus, right? That's the only thing that we differ from with men. And I was like, wow, so what am I? What am I going to turn into? What is my body going to do? And I struggled with that for maybe the first year. But after that, I was like, wait, I feel good. I can go. The new thing is going outside. I can go outside. I feel so much better. My quality of life is amazing. And so I don't regret that decision. I feel good. I'm not in menopause or anything like that yet. That was a tough decision, but one worth making.
Well, I'm glad you are feeling so much better and you can live this full life and you can now accomplish all of these amazing things with your business and with the ministry and everything else. You're an author, all the things that you're doing, quality of life is really important for your happiness, right?
Mel, I would go places and not sit down. So I would go places and be with friends and they'd be like, hey, sit over here. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'll stand. Just the horrifying thought that when I get up, there's going to be a pool of blood in my seat because I can literally feel how heavy I'm bleeding.
Sure.
I just don't have to go through that anymore. All white parties with that, I'm not going, just absolutely not. So, it's just the simple things that, some people are able to do without thinking that now I feel okay, I can do that too.
I want to touch on some things that we covered at the Endometriosis Fundraiser in Brooklyn that you were a part of.
That was an awesome time. It was a beautiful event.
Oh my gosh, the energy and the people who attended, it was just so passionate and everyone was really there to support one another and spread information. And the surgeons who we had there and what is known now, which may have not been known and published when you first were diagnosed, is that now the gold standard for diagnosis is laparoscopic surgery. So that's what they say the gold standard is for surgery. And then the gold standard in terms of surgical procedure is excision surgery. So for all of our listeners, know that, and as we've covered this in multiple of the other podcasts where we've spoken about endometriosis, at this point, what research has shown and what they're showing with the surgical procedures that are most effective for kind of controlling that endometriosis spread that Nicqueva just spoke about and removing what's there is the excision surgery. There are tons of resources. We can list some stuff in the description section of this podcast if you are wanting to find more information about that or just find specialists in general who do excision surgery. So I just wanted to add that in because that's something communication wise that many patients still don't know. And then now, like, doctors are becoming specialized in it.
I've talked to some fellow endometriosis champions who are kind of upset with the theory that surgery is the gold standard. But it's kind of tough. And I think it falls in lines with people who are desiring to have children.
Yes.
And so I think if you desire to have children, then, you are making the choice to sort of put your endometriosis aside and keep trying, which is a beautiful thing. However, just from my experience, I know they truly can't see what's in there unless they're putting a camera in there. And so, not knowing what you're dealing with is kind of tough. And for so long, and because you don't really hear of people dying from endometriosis, I think some people don't take it as seriously. But on that same weekend that we were all together back in March, we've met people who had multiple lungs collapse due to endometriosis spreading up so far.
Yeah.
So I think at minimum, you should definitely at least get a camera put in there so you can know what you're dealing with, know where it's at, see what stage you're dealing with, because surgery is really tough, but it definitely does work, for allowing us to see. Because like I said, I was getting ultrasound and imaging every 6 months, and that was never detected.
Mm-hmm.
They see cysts, but if it's a thickening, they just can't see it. And yeah, it's tough. It's really, really tough. And I feel for people in that position.
So the research that they're working on now, which is idealistic for what we want, right now there's the ROSE study. I think it's the ROSE 2 study maybe at this point that's associated with EndoFound. And so what they've been doing, and this is going to take time because only certain people will fit the criteria for this, people who have not had any endometriosis surgeries, haven't been formally diagnosed with it, are giving their menstrual samples, so like some of the blood from their periods. The hypothesis and what they're found, and they're just collecting enough data to prove, is that there is a genetic component and they can see a certain pattern from the blood that they're analyzing. For those who don't know about that or think they might want to participate, I'll also include the link there, because anyone who hasn't had a surgery yet, who hasn't been formally diagnosed, but has the symptoms, like Nicqueva has mentioned, the painful periods, heavy bleeding, at different levels, painful sex is another one, different gastrointestinal symptoms, or even some of the breathing difficulties that you mentioned too. Find a specialist. You can come to a pelvic floor physical therapist if you want to talk to us first. There's a lot of musculoskeletal symptoms too that we can find. And then eventually we would refer you to someone just to talk about your symptoms. And if you're not sure, or even if you just want to go directly to EndoFound and that link to participate, the more people who participate, the better, because then it's going to give enough data. We'll be able to have the concrete evidence of the genetic pattern that they find in the blood. And then with that, then we can find a treatment. So
and I think that's why it's really important to try to get rid of the stigma behind, talking about periods and it being a negative thing. Like, no, we really have to put it in the forefront. We're always trying to hide, or we have so many people who are afraid to speak. And I was definitely one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't imagine in a million years ago that I would where I am today, speaking to other people about it, about personal things that go on in your body, because we were taught, not intentionally, but we were taught that is something of shame.
Yeah.
But if it's something of shame and it is hurting so many people, how are we going to fix it? So getting rid of that stigma behind it and just, getting it out there, sharing your samples, whatever the case might be, is so important. Because even as I look at my almost 15-year-old and the irregularities of her periods, and I'm just frightened. And so I'm desperate. I don't want her to go through what I went through. I don't want any teenage girl or young lady to go through what I went through. So I'm really desperate for, answers and, solutions. Solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can you talk about any words of encouragement or victory to the people with endometriosis who are listening now?
Yeah. This life that we live is like a precious jewel. It's kind of like diamonds that they come out of the dirt. There's so many things that we're going to have to come out of. But at the end, we are definitely going to shine bright. We're going to be okay. We're still of value, no matter what, your diagnosis is or what you've been labeled as or, the gaslighting that you've been through. It does not take away from your value as a person, as a woman, as a man, or whoever you might be, as a person. It does not take away from your value. I think kind of like how I said at the last event we were together, you just have to change your relationship with pain as well. Realize that it's a gift. It's speaking to you. It's letting you know something is going on. And you just kind of have to follow that journey until you get a solution. But my concern for the general public is giving up. I don't want anybody to give up. I don't want anybody to feel like it's too much. I don't want anybody to feel like their life is not worth living. Because I realize, in hindsight, just being around people who are in pain so often, and even myself being in pain so often, I never had like suicidal thoughts or anything like that. But that depression that you can seep into, it looks different in everybody. And so like, not leaving the house, not socializing, not wanting to be around people or isolating yourself. Those are all things that affect your quality of life and can lead to you feeling like your life isn't worth anything. So I just really want people to feel encouraged that your life is worth living, that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that, there are answers and we have to be a part of the solution, right? So I know it's difficult. I know it's hard, but put yourself out there, go to all these studies, annoy the doctors, annoy all the researchers, annoy them, get on their nerves. It's fine, because you need these solutions and most want to help find it. You're right. Most do. So I just want everybody to be encouraged that their life is worth living. There is light at the end of the tunnel. You can live a pain-free life. You just have to, unfortunately, you have to be very diligent about it. It's not just going to come to us. We got to do the work. And, I believe that it can happen for anyone. I really, really do.
Beautiful. Thank you. The mental health portion that you touched on is really important. And I'll list some other resources as well. There are also endometriosis support groups to all of our listeners, and there's ways to find community and then also to find providers who can help you. Pelvic floor physical therapy is one, especially at Inspira. We do some craniosacral therapy, visceral manipulation, and then traditional pelvic floor physical therapy. So there's other specialized treatments that we do that help our patients a lot. There's acupuncture, there's different herbs that you can do. And then having a psychologist, specifically someone who's a pain psychologist or is specialized in pelvic floor women's health diagnoses is important. So really finding that community and finding that support. It's out there. Like Nicqueva said, don't give up, keep going forward, stay persistent. Nicqueva, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. And thank you for the listeners to tuning in. Please stay tuned in next time for another informative chat. Take care.